On a cold Monday morning in Manhattan, billionaire real estate mogul Ethan Calloway sat inside a 47-floor glass boardroom staring at a contract worth nearly $4 billion. Outside the windows, heavy rain slid slowly down the skyline, while reporters gathered below the building waiting to witness what financial analysts were already calling the deal of the decade. One signature from Ethan would erase an entire Brooklyn neighborhood and replace it with luxury towers, private penthouses, designer stores, and rooftop restaurants built for people wealthy enough to forget the lives that existed there before. Inside the room, lawyers sat quietly with folders spread across the table while investors exchanged confident smiles, already celebrating profits they had not yet earned. Ethan looked calm on the surface, but deep inside, something felt strangely unsettled that morning. He had spent 20 years building his empire from nothing. Every sacrifice, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led him to this exact moment. Yet as he reached for the expensive gold pin resting beside the contract, a tiny voice suddenly shattered the silence in a way nobody inside that room would ever forget. "Daddy, don't sign that." The pen froze instantly between Ethan's fingers. Every head in the boardroom turned toward the doorway where a small girl stood beside a frightened maid clutching her hand tightly. The child could not have been older than 7. She wore a faded blue sweater, carried a worn stuffed rabbit under one arm, and looked directly at Ethan with tears beginning to form in her eyes. For several seconds, nobody moved. One investor looked confused while another leaned toward the legal team, whispering nervously. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward the child, and for the first time in years, the powerful billionaire looked genuinely afraid. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The maid standing beside the little girl looked completely terrified, as though she already understood the damage those 4 words had caused. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I tried to stop her." But Ethan barely heard the apology. His attention remained fixed on the child staring back at him without fear. Around the conference table, the tension became unbearable. Several investors shifted uncomfortably, while security near the doorway hesitated, unsure whether they should remove the maid and the little girl immediately. Then one attorney finally broke the silence. "Mr. Calloway, should we continue?" Ethan never answered, because the child suddenly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old, faded photograph. Slowly, she walked toward the massive conference table and placed the picture directly beside the unsigned contract. Ethan's face immediately lost color. The photograph showed a younger version of himself standing on a rooftop beside a woman with long dark hair, smiling into the camera during summer rain. Her name was Claire Bennett, and according to everything Ethan believed for almost 20 years, Claire Bennett disappeared from his life forever. The little girl looked up at Ethan quietly. "Mom said you would recognize it." A strange silence settled over the room again as Ethan stared at the photograph with shaking hands. Because there was only one person alive who could have owned that picture. One person who knew about that rooftop. One person connected to memories Ethan buried decades earlier beneath wealth, ambition, and emotional distance. Slowly, Ethan stood from his chair. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The little girl swallowed nervously before answering. "My name is Lily." Something inside Ethan shifted the moment she spoke. Her voice carried a familiarity he could not explain, and somehow that frightened him more than anything else happening around him. The maid quickly stepped forward again. "Sir, please, we should leave." But Ethan's eyes remained locked on Lily. "Where did you get that photograph?" Lily looked down at the picture carefully before answering. "My mommy kept it hidden for a long time." Ethan's heartbeat suddenly became louder inside his chest. "Your mother?" Lily nodded slowly. "Claire Bennett." Across the boardroom, one investor quietly muttered under his breath, while another stared openly in confusion. Ethan looked completely frozen now, trapped somewhere between the present and memories he spent years trying to destroy. Because 20 years earlier, before the skyscrapers and luxury towers, before the magazines and television interviews, Ethan Calloway was just a poor young man living in a crumbling Brooklyn apartment, trying desperately to escape the same poverty that consumed his childhood. His mother, Margaret Calloway, worked as a maid for wealthy families across Manhattan. Every morning before sunrise, she cleaned homes belonging to people who barely acknowledged her existence. Ethan still remembered watching her hands crack from endless cleaning chemicals and hearing her apologize whenever she could not afford simple things other children took for granted. Those memories stayed with him for years, shaping the anger and ambition that eventually turned him into one of the most powerful developers in New York. Ethan promised himself as a child that he would never be poor again. He would never allow weakness, emotion, or attachment to destroy his future. And for a long time, that promise worked. He built companies, made millions, bought penthouses overlooking the city he once struggled to survive in. But somewhere during that climb, Ethan slowly became emotionally unreachable. His marriage collapsed. His family drifted away. Friendships disappeared. Work became the only thing left. Yet long before money consumed him completely, there had been Claire Bennett. Claire was a struggling musician living in the same Brooklyn apartment building where Ethan grew up. She played piano at a small jazz bar downtown and laughed at how seriously Ethan treated life even back then. She saw through the emotional walls he tried hiding behind long before anyone else did. During thunderstorms, they used to sit beside an old piano in the apartment lobby while Claire played soft melodies late into the night. Ethan told her things he never admitted to anyone else. How ashamed he felt watching his mother work as a maid. How terrified he was of failing. How badly he wanted to escape Brooklyn forever. Claire listened to all of it without judgment. For a while, Ethan believed she was the one person who truly understood him. But ambition changes people slowly. As Ethan's business opportunities grew, so did his obsession with success. Meetings replaced evenings together. Arguments replaced laughter. Claire begged him repeatedly to slow down before work consumed him completely, but Ethan refused to listen. Then one night, Claire told him she was pregnant. Instead of reacting with love, Ethan panicked. Fear turned into anger. Their final argument ended with Claire walking away in tears while Ethan convinced himself she would eventually return. But she never did. Weeks became months. Months became years. Eventually, Ethan buried every memory connected to her beneath work and money until even hearing her name became painful. Yet now, standing inside the boardroom beside a billion-dollar contract, Claire Bennett's daughter had suddenly appeared in front of him, holding pieces of the past he thought disappeared forever. The room remained silent as Ethan slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Lily continued staring at him quietly, while Maya looked moments away from collapsing under the pressure surrounding them. Then Lily reached into her pocket again and carefully pulled out a silver necklace with a tiny crack near the clasp. The moment Ethan saw it, his breathing stopped completely. He gave that necklace to Claire during a thunderstorm nearly 20 years earlier after telling her he loved her for the first time. "Mom wanted you to have it back," Lily whispered softly. Ethan picked up the necklace with trembling hands while memories crashed into him harder now. The rooftop during summer rain. Claire laughing beside the piano. Her hand resting against her stomach the night she told him about the baby. Then silence. Endless silence afterward. One investor finally interrupted impatiently. "Ethan, what exactly is going on here?" But Ethan barely heard him anymore, because another realization had suddenly begun forming inside his mind. He slowly looked back toward Lily, studying her face carefully now. The shape of her eyes, the way she spoke softly when nervous, even the way she tilted her head slightly while waiting for answers. Claire. He saw Claire in every detail. And for the first time in 2 decades, Ethan began understanding the possibility he spent years refusing to face. Lily might not simply know Claire Bennett. Lily might be his daughter. Maya looked toward Ethan carefully before finally speaking again. "Claire never stopped loving you," she whispered quietly. "Even after everything." Ethan closed his eyes briefly as guilt settled heavily over him. The boardroom no longer mattered. The investors no longer mattered. Even the $4 billion contract sitting untouched before him suddenly felt meaningless compared to the child standing only a few feet away carrying the memories of a life he abandoned long ago. Later that evening, after the investors finally left and reporters downstairs continued speculating about the delayed signing, Ethan returned alone to his penthouse overlooking Manhattan while rain continued pouring across the city outside. Maya had taken Lily home hours earlier, but the little girl's words continued echoing inside his mind. "Daddy, don't sign that." Ethan loosened his tie slowly before walking through the silent apartment toward the old piano near the fireplace. It was the same piano Claire used to play during thunderstorms years earlier. For a long time, Ethan simply stared at it without moving. Then suddenly, somewhere behind him inside the quiet penthouse, he heard a soft melody drifting through the darkness. Ethan froze instantly. Slowly, he turned around toward the hallway. Lily sat quietly near the piano bench, softly humming a lullaby to herself while holding her stuffed rabbit against her chest. Ethan's entire body went still, because it was the exact same lullaby his mother used to sing to him when he was a child growing up in Brooklyn nearly 30 years earlier. A song nobody else should have known. Ethan stared at Lily in complete disbelief as the melody echoed softly through the apartment. Then finally, almost afraid to ask, he whispered the question that would change everything forever. How could this little girl know a song nobody had heard in 30 years? Ethan Calloway spent most of his life believing success could erase pain. For 20 years, he convinced himself money, power, and distance could silence the memories that once kept him awake at night. But sitting inside that silent Manhattan boardroom, holding Claire Bennett's necklace in trembling hands, Ethan finally understood something terrifying. The past never truly disappears. It waits quietly in the darkest corners of a person's life until the moment they are forced to face it again. Around him, investors and attorneys remained completely speechless as the billionaire businessman they admired slowly fell apart in front of their eyes. The unsigned demolition contract still rested on the conference table, but nobody cared about the deal anymore. Every person in that room understood they were witnessing a truth far more powerful than money. Ethan stared down at Claire's handwritten letter while his breathing grew heavier with every passing second. Then finally, almost afraid of the answer, he looked toward Maya Thompson. "What happened to Claire?" he asked softly. Maya lowered her eyes immediately. For several painful moments, she said nothing at all. Then quietly, with tears forming in her eyes, she answered the question Ethan had unknowingly spent 20 years avoiding. "Claire died 3 months ago." The words hit Ethan harder than anything else that morning. He leaned back slowly in his chair as though the strength had suddenly left his body completely. Claire Bennett was gone. The woman he once loved more than anyone in the world had died believing he abandoned her. And the little girl standing only a few feet away had grown up without ever knowing her father. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The boardroom remained silent while Ethan struggled to process everything crashing into him at once. Memories he buried for decades now returned with painful clarity. Claire sitting beside the old piano during thunderstorms. Claire smiling while talking about raising a family together one day. Claire crying the night she told him she was pregnant while he reacted with fear instead of love. For years, Ethan convinced himself Claire disappeared because she wanted to leave him behind. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. Maya slowly stepped closer to the conference table and looked directly at Ethan. "Claire never stopped loving you," she whispered softly. Ethan closed his eyes as guilt spread across his face. Maya explained that after leaving Brooklyn, Claire worked multiple jobs while raising Lily alone. Some nights, she performed music in restaurants until midnight before returning home exhausted just to make sure Lily had food and school supplies. She never became wealthy, never escaped struggle. But according to Maya, Claire carried one thing with her until the very end. Hope. Hope that someday Ethan might become the man she always believed existed beneath his ambition and emotional walls. Ethan listened in silence while Maya continued revealing pieces of a life he should have been part of all along. Claire hid her illness from almost everyone during the early years. By the time doctors discovered the cancer spreading through her body, treatment options had already become limited. Yet even during the worst moments of her sickness, Claire refused to speak about Ethan with anger. Maya remembered nights when Claire sat awake beside Lily's bed softly humming lullabies while holding Ethan's old photograph against her chest. She kept telling Lily that her father wasn't a bad man, Maya said quietly. She said he was just lost. Ethan lowered his head immediately as tears filled his eyes again. Around the room, several investors looked visibly uncomfortable now while others stared silently at the floor, unable to interrupt the emotional weight unfolding before them. Then Lily slowly walked closer to Ethan until she stood directly beside his chair. She looked at him carefully for a moment before speaking the words her mother left behind. "My mommy said you weren't evil," Lily whispered softly. Ethan looked up toward her through tears. She said you were just lost. That was the moment Ethan Calloway finally broke completely. After decades of suppressing regret, loneliness, grief, and guilt beneath wealth and success, the emotional walls he spent years building around himself collapsed all at once. He covered his face with trembling hands while tears poured freely in front of an entire room full of stunned strangers. Because for the first time in 20 years, Ethan fully understood what his ambition had truly cost him. Not just Claire, not just Lily, himself. He had spent his entire adult life chasing money because he believed poverty destroyed families. But in the process, he became emotionally unreachable and destroyed the very people who loved him most. Across the table, one investor finally slammed his hand down in frustration. Ethan, enough, he snapped sharply. We are talking about billions of dollars here. Another investor leaned forward angrily. Sign the contract and deal with your personal problems later. But Ethan barely heard them anymore. Slowly, he lifted his head and looked down at the demolition papers spread across the table. Then another realization struck him with devastating force. The building scheduled for demolition was not simply another redevelopment project. It was the same apartment complex where his mother spent years struggling to raise him alone. The same hallways where Claire Bennett once laughed beside him while dreaming about their future. The same rooftop where he first promised Claire he would never leave her. And without even realizing it, Ethan had nearly destroyed the final connection to every person who ever truly loved him. The room remained completely still as Ethan stared silently at the contract. Then slowly, he reached for the expensive fountain pen resting beside the papers. Several investors relaxed slightly, believing he had finally come to his senses. But instead of signing the contract, Ethan suddenly grabbed the stack of demolition papers with both hands and tore them directly down the middle. Gasps exploded across the boardroom instantly. One attorney stood from his chair in shock, while investors began shouting furiously all around him. "What are you doing?" someone yelled. "You're destroying the company," another shouted angrily. But Ethan ignored every voice around him. He stood slowly from his chair while torn pieces of the contract scattered across the polished table like fragments of the life he no longer wanted. Then quietly, with tears still visible in his eyes, Ethan looked toward the furious investors and finally spoke the truth he spent decades refusing to admit. "For years I thought success meant escaping my past," he said softly. The room fell silent again. Ethan looked toward Lily standing near him before continuing. "But all I really did was abandon the people who loved me." In the weeks that followed, Ethan Calloway shocked the entire city by canceling the redevelopment project completely. News stations called it one of the most unexpected decisions in New York business history. Instead of demolishing the apartment building, Ethan invested millions restoring it. He repaired elevators, renovated apartments, rebuilt damaged hallways, and guaranteed affordable housing protection for every family living there. But the biggest change happened on the ground floor of the building itself. Ethan funded the creation of a community center named after Margaret Calloway and Claire Bennett, honoring the two women whose love shaped his life even after he spent years running from their memory. Inside the center stood a beautiful piano where neighborhood children could learn music for free. Ethan personally insisted on that detail because for the first time in years, piano music no longer reminded him only of regret. It reminded him of second chances. Slowly, Ethan also began rebuilding something even more valuable than his reputation: his relationship with Lily. At first, their connection felt awkward and fragile because Ethan had no idea how to be a father. But Lily never demanded perfection from him. She simply wanted honesty. Some evenings they sat together on the rooftop of the renovated building watching sunsets stretch across Brooklyn, while Ethan told her stories about Claire she had never heard before. Other nights Lily listened quietly, while Ethan finally spoke openly about his mother, his fears, and the mistakes that haunted him for years. And little by little, the cold, emotionally distant billionaire New York once feared slowly began disappearing. One evening nearly a year later, Ethan stood beside Lily on the rooftop during sunset, while soft piano music drifted upward from the community center below. Children laughed in the courtyard, while warm golden lights stretched across the skyline surrounding them. Ethan looked toward Manhattan, glowing in the distance before lowering his eyes toward Lily, standing beside him. Then gently, almost as though afraid the moment might disappear, Lily slipped her small hand into his. Ethan smiled softly through tears, threatening his eyes once again. Because after spending most of his life chasing wealth, power, and approval, he finally understood the truth Claire Bennett tried teaching him all along. Sometimes, the people we ignore carry the truths that can save us. Do you think Ethan deserved forgiveness after abandoning his past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories filled with mystery, redemption, and unforgettable twists. Like and share this video with someone who still believes in second chances, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story.